Yeah, it's half past 2.
Okay. So there's not a whole lot of us in here listening to my presentation, but I hope that during this half an hour we have before the next round, some people are going to show up, and let's just start. So this is my presentation, starting with a series of presentations. We have 3 of them during this weekend, all of them during this lunch hour. And my presentation is about, I've titled this Finnish politics, but actually this is more about theory behind deck construction and how to build a combat module and what you can think when you're constructing your, for example, the combat part of your deck. This is going to be somewhat theoretical, and for me at least, it's I get some sort of perverse enjoyment if I see some theory that describes things that I have thought to myself, mostly implicitly. Like I can recognize my own thought in the theory I'm reading, and I hope I can convey this this experience to you, that here's something you can recognize and take over to your mental toolbox when you're playing the game. I guarantee you this is not going to help you anyway when you sit at the table next round and try to make decisions about the game and what you should do, but perhaps this will give you some tools to analyze your deck and your game. Alright, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to present 2 graphs to you, and I'm going to explain what they mean, and I hope we can discuss them afterwards. This is going to be, the first one is, this part is about the role of combat in this game, the basic mechanism of combat in Vetus, and the latter one is about the combat module you can build in Vetus and how you can analyze it and how you can build it and how you can think about it. So we'll hop into the role of combat. I see some Finns, some Swedes, some other people. How many of you are familiar with this? This is the tactical wheel by Cause and Effect team, about half of you. I'm going to, in short words, explain what this is, and I'm going to elaborate this a bit. So, it was in the Cause and Effect Season 3, Episode 4. If you haven't seen it, go and watch it. It's good. I can guarantee it. This is about deck archetypes and how they counter each other. If we start with the basic theorem is that decks in Vetus can be arranged in a circle, and this circle is sort of a wheel, and this wheel will function like the game of rock, paper and scissors. So in the scissors compartment we have full damage decks, for example Stealth Bleed, Power Bleed, Volts decks, which try to just oust your prey as quickly as possible. These decks are hard countered by rock decks, and rock decks are sort of reactive passive. This is a term the Cause and Effect team gave to these decks. And these are like Oster Sweeney's Imbue decks that try to just build their own game, have some sort of defenses against these full damage kind of decks, and just try to build their game until they can just take over and are just win in the late game. And the last part is the paper decks, which are minion control decks. that is rush combat decks, mind raid decks, sort of decks that do their things proactively, that try to they attack other players' minions or their resources on the table. They don't attack the pool directly. And these kind of decks, they try to often survive first, then reduce the table to like 3 players, and after that just take over and win the game. Because they are not so much interested in accumulating their own resources, they are better off when there are fewer opponents. And of course, these seem like combat decks, most of them, except of course these mind raid decks and such. Also, reactive passive decks have sort of combat. Do you have questions related to this model? Do you understand how this works? Did I describe this about accurately?
Yes.
Okay.
Perfect.
I tried to think about this, and I tried to think, why does it work like this? Why is it that scissors is countered by rock? Why is it that rock is countered by paper and so forth? And I came to the conclusion that it derives from the mechanics of the game these different decks are using. And I constructed basically the same model, but with mechanics, and this is what I get. We have, first off, we have 3 basic mechanisms in this game. First we have actions, and this is the domain of competition where the winner has most efficient actions. They are the Swedes who bleed for 6, and Finns are the losers because they bleed only for 1. Then we have another somewhat different domain of competition, and that is avoidance versus block. That could be stealth versus intercept, but there are other ways of getting past blockers, like handed subversion, like the Swedes know. And this I see as somewhat different domain of competition. And then the third one, mechanically, is straightforward combat. So I see that these 3 deck types that this cause and effect team characterized in their model, they can be seen as combining 2 of these mechanisms. So that for a stealth bleed deck, we have, this is what I have termed successful actions. It tries to do efficient actions, bleed for 6, and it does have some sort of avoidance to avoid blockers. Then we have block combat, which of course is the other part of the avoidance versus block aspect. It tries to block, it tries to prevent others from doing their actions. And it does have some sort of combat, because blocks lead to combat. And then we have rush combat, which forgoes the avoidance versus block module altogether and focuses on combat, and it does have some actions, mainly to enter combat. I see that these 3 decks are sort of the pure archetypes, or the most focused decks that you can build. And the advantage of building a deck like this is that if you have, let's say, a block combat deck that has a lot of blocking and a little of combat, if your predator, for instance, is a successful actions deck who is trying to bleed you out, you can counter their avoidance versus block module with your own block module, and you can trump them in your combat. Which means that whatever they put into their actions module, how effective their actions are, all their governance and conditions, they are for naught. They don't gain anything from drawing them or playing them or getting putting them into their decks. So a focus deck can, if it functions properly, it can sort of nullify their opponent's input on the third module which this focus deck is ignoring. Another example, we'll have rush combat. It doesn't care if its prey is playing a lot of intercept or little intercept. It doesn't matter for the deck. It is going to rush them and put them into torpor, and all the resources or whatever the block deck is putting into blocking, it doesn't matter. So we have these three kinds of basic archetypes, and we also have some sort of toolbox decks that combine from different mechanisms, and they are basically, as I see it, they are trying to exploit their opponent's weaknesses. They're trying to shift the focus of the game on the fields of competition where their opponents are not putting their resources. What do you think about this? Does this speak to you? Do you feel like you can recognize this from your own game or your own thinking? I think most of this is sort of like intuitively understandable, and I don't know if this is saying a whole lot new to you about this game. But do you recognize this? Yes?
Rock, paper, scissors.
Rock, paper, scissors, sort of, yes. And this is, I think this is a reason why the rock, paper, scissors works this way. I think you of course, you had this in your mind, but I don't know if you explained this in such longish manner. Yes. I'm going to go forward because time is limited, and I'm going to speak shortly about the anatomy of a combat module. In this previous section, we can see that we are building a combat module. For example, if we have block combat deck or rush combat deck, we need to have some sort of combat module, and we need to know what it's going to try to achieve. And I've tried to analyze the aspects of a module. It could be combat module, but it could be, for example, stealth module or something. But for purposes of this presentation, this is going to be a combat module, because this is Finnish politics after all. Okay, so I tried to analyze the aspects, and I'm going through them. So first off, we have some core variables that relate directly to the module, that are attributes of the module. And we have two kinds of input variables. This is probably a statistician would disagree with this title, but I don't care. First off, we have the investment. As I see, this is the part of the cost of the module that you pay during the deck building phase. These are the cards that you put into the module, and in your library, in your crypt card choices, you have to, if you want to play combat, you need to play vampires that have combat disciplines, or you don't have to, but it does help often. And the other part is the cost, and this is during the game. How costly it is for you to do combat. And this can be translated into how much blood do you lose in an average game, or an average combat. That is, even if you are not playing a combat module, you still have some sort of cost incurred by not playing combat. That's at least how I see it, if you put it on sufficient level of abstraction. These I see are the input variables of combat module. Any questions or comments about this? Nothing. But then what do we get out of our investment? First off, we get power. And as I see it, this is this is like when you're playing your Enkidu and you have your 6 red cards, maybe 7 red cards in your hand, and you rush and you play all of them, how much damage you can do. How much avoidance can you counter, like combat decks? How many psyches you have? How much you are going to burn the other vampire? That is mainly the question. Or maybe not in such grandiose manner, it might be just your magnum is your power. But it is, how effective is your combat at its best? Then, on the other part, we get consistency. And this could be like the cooldown of your combat. How long does it take after you have dumped your red hand? How long does it take to draw a certain level of combat into your hand, and what's the level going to be? I guess you are following. Yes. And then there are some other variables that I see are not directly related to, directly part of the combat module, but are more related to how the combat module functions in your deck and how the combat module functions against other opponents and such. And these I have termed external variables. And first of these is very important. It is, I have termed it here development, but this is like the temporal aspect of your module. This means that if you're playing like Fatima multi-rush, you're going to need your assault rifle before you can start doing serious damage. And this is, once you get the assault rifle, your power level jumps up, of course. And you can start doing your thing. And other example might be weenie animalism that tries to amass, for example, okay, this is a bad example, but it could be like murder of crows. And such, trying to make your combat more stronger during the game. The other part is, the second variable would be strategy, and this is about how does your combat module link to your general strategy in your game. And this comes back to the circle you saw earlier. For example, combat, you can the main question is whether you are going to be proactive with your combat or reactive with your combat. Are you going to block or are you going to rush? And that determines a lot about how you use your combat module, even if the combat module stays the same. Another part of the strategy is how committed you are to winning combats. I can say, for example, I'm playing the Last Chance today and I'm playing Weenie Auspex. And Weenie Auspex is a deck that blocks a lot and has somewhat little of combat. But it relies on winning the combats nevertheless. If I don't win combats, I'm going to lose the game. And even if I have invested very little in my combat module, it's still important to me to win. So this is part of the strategy variable. That's at least how I can see it. And third part are the specific interactions between your combat module and other combat modules. For example, if you're playing aggro poke, you're going to be very weak against ally decks or ally rush decks, even if you are going to be okay against potent rush decks, which when pitted against the ally rush decks are going to duke each other out. Okay, so these are the variables of a combat module as I see it. And this is my second graph. And this is summarizes these variables. Any comments at this point or questions? Do you think you can use it to improve your game? One player does. Another maybe. Yes. some do. Okay, that is good. I don't know if this is going to make me any better player, but this helps me to maybe put things into right order. Okay, I'm going to talk a bit about how you can use this to think further about your comment module. And this is about basically min-maxing these variables. These variables on the left side of the screen are the input variables, and you basically want to minimize how much you are putting into your comment module, and you want to maximize what you get out of it. So I'm going to ask you a question, and I hope someone can answer me. So if your comment module is all about, I want to minimize my investment into combat. I don't want to invest anything into my comment module. What's your comment module going to be like? Someone has to answer this. I'm not going anywhere before.
0 cards.
0 cards. Yes, that is correct. That was the easy one. Now, if you want to minimize the cost of combat, what is your comment module going to look like?
Prevent.
Prevent. Yes, that is part of it. Stare down. Yes, these are two important ways of avoiding the cost incurred by combat. Prevention, competence, obedience, you know that drill. What about these? Now we are getting somewhat more difficult. If you want to maximize your power.
Increase strength.
Yes, and thrown gate or whatnot. That is correct. That means you are going to yes. Potent combat is a good example of trying to maximize your power, but if you want to really maximize your power, you combine potence with something else. You can use fortitude or animalism or something. You use multiple disciplines to do maximum number of different effects during a specific combat. That is how you get most power out of combat. And the last one.
0.44 Magnum.
That is correct, sir. So you can use permanence, or you can use a repetitive cycle of combat cards, like weenie animalism, that plays just carrion crows and 8 bats from combat to combat again and again. These combat modules lead to very different decks, and the interactions are somewhat different. If you're playing let's say, you're playing a high consistency deck, weenie animalism, and you're facing off your worst nightmare, that is the Enkidu deck, that has a lot of power and a lot of combat effects. What are you going to do? How can you bring him down?
Pentex.
Pentex, that is correct. That is the ultimate common module. If you want to beat him with your red card.
You're going to use your consistency in fights over him.
Yes, that is correct.
Huge power, but it comes with the cost of lots of cards. Instead, you're just using carrion crows and 8.
Yeah. Nothing new to you. So basically, you play Heaven Uncovered on him, and you send in your first combatant, and you play your thing. He plays his. You end in torpor, he stays up and has more blood than before. Then you send in your next guy. This time, he might not have the combat cards he had in the first time. If your opponent has higher power level than you, but you have same consistency, you draw or replenish your combat effects at the same rate. If you rush him time and time again, it's going to nullify his power. And it's all about consistency. Yes, question?
Why didn't you mark him as redless instead?
Pardon?
Why didn't you mark him as redless instead?
That is probably easier, but it's going to cost you blood, and blood is very precious. That is a good question. Okay, if you're playing a powerhouse, you're playing the Enkidu deck, and you're facing the weenie animals, what are you going to do?
Be conservative. Choose your.
Choose your fights. That is good. Basically, because winning animism doesn't have high power. It has somewhat low investment cost in their minions. The weenies are weenies because they are small and you can get a lot of them. Because you need only one discipline to power the combat module, which leads to the consistency. But if you're playing your Enkidu deck, you basically want to use your power, you want to hit and let them be. You want to maintain the position where they don't have the critical mass of minions when you can't anymore handle them. You need to take down their guys until they are somewhat more manageable. And this is of course hard to do without you aggroing them on the spot and you getting the red list crushes going your way. But it's if you phrase it like, it's good for the table, you know, you have the table threat, it might work. I don't know. I guess this is all I have to say, but I hope we can. Do you have some comments about this? Someone said that, or at least nodded when I asked if they can use these in their playing or in the game or thinking. What do you think is the take-home message of this presentation? And I'm not going to give it to you, I'm going to ask you. Random.
Well, I think a very important thing is the investment cost versus power consistency.
Yes.
Because the pool cost and the minions for the win animalism is per se pretty low, but the investment cost in card slots is very high.
It is.
So it's a really, really good balancing act. It's something you have to think about all the time.
Yeah. That is true. And that is why I'm playing Weenie Orthodox and not Weenie Animism today. But also I'd like to emphasize this part. If you're going to play combat, this is very important. It is not all about the blood cost of your card, which should be pretty close to zero. You should also have some sort of combat plan which involves you not taking any damage. And when I played combat decks, I feel like I need to have my maneuvers with magnums or well-marks or guardian angels. I think that if I'm going to do combat over and over again, if it's going to be in my strategy, then I need to have some sort of plan which doesn't involve me taking hit back in combat. Because I think that combat-wise, because this is a 5-player game, the player who is losing the least in the combats in the game is getting ahead in the game. Okay. Randall.
I have a little question.
Yes.
You chose Enkidu as the powerhouse example.
Yeah, for example. Yes.
There are several other very big vampires with very good combat capabilities. Any particular reason you just... I was just thinking when you just talked about this, taking the least damage.
Yes.
How often have you played, for example, Goratrix, which ability allows you to take virtually no damage?
I haven't played Goratrix decks, and that is because I don't own them.
I see.
Okay, but when I play combat-based decks, I do play basically master-based decks that are gunners or like the Liven version where you can use the parent prevention. And I think it's been important for me during this.
So what would you prefer, power or consistency?
I think they are for different decks. I play both.
Really?
I think winning aspects is all about this.
Yeah. As is the thing with the bats. And where's the power deck?
I think for me the power deck is, if I'm playing my Celerity Magnums, it's close to power.
Okay.
because I think the line between these can be determined by if you have ways to counter commandants. Because if you're playing high power deck, you need to have some sort of answer. If you're dumping your six red cards on the table, you want them to have effect. So one of them has to be a psyche or immortal grapple or something like.
But you don't value power over consistency or vice versa.
It depends on your deck. It depends on your strategy. It's just the combat module dictates how you should interact with other combat modules. That's how I think. Okay, last two questions.
Yep.
Okay. Yeah.
What kinds of combat cards do you think are missing from V-Test?
Too difficult. I'm sorry. I have to think about it and answer it later. Okay. Then.
How do you feel about Azure tablets affecting consistency in high power decks?
It is broken, yes. Thanks, I think that's it. We have to start the next round. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.